Two visions for the future of Texas. The top candidates in the race for governor squared off on the debate stage.
I believe in a path for citizenship for the dreamers. Therefore, we need to prepare them to be here and be educated.
With ideas for where Texas is now and where we should go in the future.
The important thing that we do in the state of Texas is our job first is to make sure we educate Texas students.
We tracked a group of undecided voters to see what they thought of the candidates and if the debate changed any minds.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for a special edition of State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. The candidates for governor have spoken. The one and only debate between Lupe Valdez and Greg Abbott is now complete. Both candidates shared their thoughts on the issues facing Texas, ranging from immigration to property taxes, Harvey relief, and toll roads. We watched the debate along with a group of undecided voters divided among Democrats, Republicans, and independents. They reacted to candidates' answers using a dial system. When they liked what they heard, they turned the dials upward. When they didn't like it, they turned the dials down. We recorded all the responses using a real-time graph which showed the lines moving up and down depending on what people in the focus group thought. The red lines represent the Republican reaction. Democrats are in blue and the independents are in yellow. When the lines hover near the middle, that means that these people felt neutral about what the candidates are saying. So let's get started. We asked, in the aftermath of mass shootings, students say they feel that they're not safe in school. We asked the candidates if they think arming teachers is the answer. Only Republicans in our focus group liked the idea of arming teachers, while other ideas the candidates talked about were more popular.
We continually fortify our schools, but we won't invest in education. We want to arm our teachers, but we won't pay them as the professionals that they are. I believe they should be there to teach and take care of the children as they're doing now.
The main thing that came out was, for one, we have to enforce current law. Number two, the state must provide better mental health resources for students at school, for people in our state. And then the last thing is we got to make sure that we provide alternatives in our school for them to be more secure. Some schools want to have metal detectors, other schools want to have other strategies. We need to give schools the strategies they choose to make sure their students are safe.
We're joined by Joy Diaz, the producer for Texas Standard on KUT Public Radio, Lauren McGaughy, the Texas government reporter for Dallas Morning News, and Carlos Sanchez, the news and politics editor for the Texas Monthly. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
So we saw the lines going up and down. What was your reaction to what they were saying beyond just arming teachers in schools?
Well, I thought it was interesting that when Governor Abbott started to talk about mental health, it looked like everyone was interested in that. All the lines kind of went up, yellow, blue, and red. But then when he started to talk about maybe giving the schools a little bit more of a say over whether they wanted to bring those guns in the schools, the blue line just dipped straight down. So, I mean, no surprise, right? Everyone wants kids to have access to more services, but when it comes to the guns in the classrooms, it's a pretty big split.
It'll be interesting, too. I saw the lines diminish when what Governor Abbott was saying approximated talking points. And I'm just curious to see how the focus group will react when it's very obvious that talking points are at play.
And we know that mental health is like a big umbrella that is often used because the community that is affected by the lack of funding when it comes to mental health hates the fact that they're always scapegoated when it comes to the use of guns.
Well, we asked the candidates also about whether they support red flag laws, and Governor Abbott did not, and neither did Democrats nor independents like that.
Would not support a red flag law that would take guns away from people without due process.
This is not about continual gun violence. This is about stopping gun violence. I think the governor has confusion between gun ownership and gun violence. There is a difference for people who own guns and act appropriately and people who don't.
It was neutral for a long time right there.
Yes, but it's super interesting because this was one of Lupe Valdez's finest moments during the debate where she, put the governor on the spot and she said, basically, are you confused when it comes to gun ownership or when it comes to gun violence? And that's a very interesting point to make when it comes to red flag.
What did you think, Lauren?
I think that what the governor said is tracked with what he has said before about red flag laws. He asked the legislature to look at them, and then, they seem to suddenly not be very popular with some people in his base. The gun groups didn't like them, so he said, you know what, maybe this isn't the right time to talk about this. And we saw his base respond very well to that. The Republicans liked him saying, I believe that red flag laws might be an infringement on the Second Amendment. So, that felt like a really partisan divide there as well. And I think what Carlos brought up about the talking points is really interesting, because on so many of these issues, we know how these candidates feel already. We know that they're going to be completely split. So I'm interested to see on some of the more, unscripted moments what they think of how, especially Lupe Valdez responded.
And Josh, that is an interesting point. I think you noted that in this particular question, the response was flatlined with regard to the focus group. I think that that's because they perhaps didn't know the nuance of red flag laws. And what we saw tonight was a bureaucratic sounding governor versus an impassioned candidate challenging the governor. And the question becomes, will voters respond to that passion, or will they respond to the notion of someone who is firmly in control of the bureaucracy of state government?
All right, let's keep it there for now. Your property taxes keep rising, and it's happening all across Texas. We asked the candidates for governor what they would do to lower that burden. We'll look closer at their answers and how our panel of voters responded coming up. We're taking an in-depth look at the Texas gubernatorial debate and the response from voters. Our Sally Hernandez joins us live from our newsroom, where we gathered a group of undecided voters. Sally, tell us a little bit about this group. How did they respond tonight?
They responded very well, Josh, with the dials in hand. A lot of them had a whole lot to say when it comes to the reaction of the response from Governor Abbott and Lupe Valdez. These, as you mentioned, were voters who came in undecided, a mix of Republicans, of Democrats, and independents. And we really wanted to know if the debate helped them in the end pick a candidate. So I flat out asked them that question. Our focus group had a mix, as we mentioned, of Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And not many people want to pay more in property taxes. I have to tell you, being in that same room, there was definitely an audible response to that question, especially when Governor Abbott said that he wanted to limit that when it comes to property taxes. So watch the spike from independents. They were definitely on board with that idea.
No government should have the ability to tax you out of your home. We got to remember this, Julie, and that is that people who own homes, they're not renters of the property from the city they're paying taxes to. And so we need to reform this in a way that will allow voter approval before taxes are increased.
It doesn't make sense to me that you keep pushing the burden down, but yet you won't allow them to do anything. The state needs to pay its fair share.
We're back with our roundtable. No surprise that property tax resonated so much with voters.
Oh, no, not at all. But you know what? In a bold move, I have to say it, because Lupe Valdez, the Democratic candidate, is very aware of how important this debate is and was. It may have been the only chance that she had to have the ears of the state and the eyes of the state on her. So in a bold move, the topic was property taxes, and she redirected to education, which is like the, emblem that she's embracing. And so, fantastic move on her part, I think.
Yeah, and she hasn't really had a specific plan with this so far. We've heard a very specific plan from Governor Abbott, though.
Yeah, that's what I was going to point out. My big question going into the debate was, will she wow the crowd? Will she have personality? And she had that in spades.
And will she be memorable?
Yeah, she was memorable, because that was the one thing she needed to do, right? She needed a gut punch. She needed something that people would say, oh, who's that? I think she did that, but where she lacked, which has been a criticism of her, is some of her plans are scant on the details. So we heard Governor Abbott criticize. He said, look, whatever she might be saying, I'm the only one on this stage that has provided an actual plan to lower your taxes. And she kept hammering him, I thought, very well. She was very articulate on this. You're pushing the burden down to the local level, but then we didn't quite hear what would she do to education? How would she reform the system to fix that problem?
And that is kind of the ease and the challenge of being a challenger. It's the notion that you can throw rocks at the existing system, and the challenge then becomes, what would you do to change the system? I found it interesting looking at the focus group response. We're beginning to see now the divisions between Democrat and Republicans that are inherent. So to me, it suggests that they don't need Lupe in particular to go after that base. She needs to go after the independents. Well, to use a sports metaphor, she needed a knockout punch tonight, and while she was feisty in the ring, the knockout punch was far from coming.
Yeah,
I agree.
I should mention, though, that not everyone thought that there was a winner. You know, some people still don't have a choice after tonight's debate.
Yeah. Well, and that's the problem we always have in Texas, right? People don't vote. So, you know, maybe they aren't, maybe neither one of the candidates are really bringing the fire to their veins, and they figure, you know, that Abbott guy's probably going to win, so is it worth me even voting?
And that's the key, I think, not for this particular race, because I think this race is a lock in many respects. It is the other races on the ballot, in particular the U.S. Senate race, and what impact either Lupe Valdez or Greg Abbott will have in turning out voters. And I think that's where tonight was significant, although unstated.
All right, well, some legislators have tried to overturn a state law that lets college students receive in-state tuition regardless of immigration status. Tonight, the candidates for governor told us where they stand on the issue.
The law is structured, is flawed, and it has to be fixed.
And you would repeal
So we're
it.
blaming the students for a broken immigration system? That's what we're doing.
Up next, we'll look closer at their answers and their ideas for the future of the Texas Dream Act. For the second question of the night, the candidates were asked about the Texas Dream Act. It allows undocumented students in Texas to pay in-state tuition at Texas universities. When asked whether or not he would repeal it, Governor Abbott said the law from 2014 was passed with good intentions, but has some flaws.
The law that passed said that these students who received in-state tuition had to demonstrate that they were on a pathway toward achieving legal status. However, there is no apparatus in the law to make sure that that, in fact, is being done. Hence, the law is structured, is flawed, and it has to be fixed.
And you would
So
repeal
we're
it.
blaming the students for a broken immigration system? That's what we're doing. We're blaming the students because they can't go through a decent immigration system, so we continue to blame them.
You know, the thing with the DREAM Act is super interesting. You always hear, this is a problem that I believe Lupe Valdez had in this debate, and it is that she did not change the rhetoric. What she said is what we've been hearing for a long time. I think the most convincing argument I've heard comes from the business community in Texas. And what the business community has said is, we want people to spend money in Texas. And how do you get people to earn more than minimum wage? Well, you educate them. And if you educate them, you have a spending crowd. And I think that makes sense. You have an educated workforce, you know, they spend money. I think that's a more convincing rhetoric. However, I do understand what she was saying. You're blaming the students for not fixing an immigration system. But then again, the state of Texas cannot fix a federal immigration system.
Joy, I thought this was a question where very clearly it was passion versus policy. Governor Abbott talked in policy tones, and you had a flat line. Lupe Valdez began with a very passionate response, and her numbers spiked on terms of the response. I think this was her opportunity in the debate, and frankly, I think it was a missed opportunity ultimately. I think that she should have been more aggressive and more on the attack with Governor Abbott. This was an opening to talk about Senate Bill 4 and the implications it has for the Hispanic community and a large demographic in this state. And she did not take that opportunity.
She also didn't point out that the Texas Dream Act was a Republican proposal.
Absolutely.
This was a Rick Perry passed law that he was very proud of. And, you know, she could have said, you know, this was your own party that passed this, and now you're saying it's flawed. You know, where was that thought years ago? We've never had comprehensive immigration reform. She didn't say that either. So I did think that she, like you said, was very passionate on the issue, but she did miss some entrees to attack Abbott for that. And I was curious to see if the bill is, if the law is flawed, what would be Abbott's fix? She didn't come back and say, well, then how would you fix it? Would you do away with it, or is there some other way?
Absolutely. The missed opportunity was just there, instead of focusing on what Texas cannot do as a state, it could have focused on what Texas can do, what you were mentioning, Senate Bill 4, and what would you do, Governor?
Yeah, and the flat line that you mentioned on the red and blue flat line when he started speaking in policy tones, right? That was surprising to me because the Texas DREAM Act was a Republican proposal. I think that shows how the Republican Party nationally and in Texas has changed, because that was something that, the red line maybe would have been a lot higher if it was Rick Perry talking about it, but now it's several years later and our views on immigration have changed.
Well, there was a clear political split when Sheriff Valdez talked about spending state dollars to secure the border, while most everyone liked the governor's answer about stopping human trafficking.
We need to put our money in Texas. Texas needs to use their money for things that will improve Texas, not things that the national government is supposed to be taking care of.
I want to go after the human traffickers, the sex traffickers, the cartel members, those who threaten us like gang members, the rise of MS-13 gang members in the state of Texas. I want to do something to put a stop to that.
Unsurprising. I mean, going after human trafficking is something that a lot of attorneys general across the nation are doing now. It's been a major proposal of our own attorney general here, Ken Paxton, going after those people. So I think everyone is for that, right? Everyone is ensuring that people aren't being trafficked, especially in a sexual nature. So unsurprising to me, but interesting that it is kind of a party line issue, something that you're hearing all the time, and yet everyone's like, yeah, I'm for that. Let's do that.
Where I found fascinating is I think they reversed roles here. I think at this point, Lupe Valdez was talking policy, and Governor Abbott went after the passion. And it's the passion of fear-mongering in many respects. And that is something that has been very beneficial to achieving better numbers in terms of where voters are and where they want to be. And again, it was a missed opportunity. I also thought it was interesting. This is where Lupe Valdez in the primary was criticized because of her lack of knowledge about how much was spent for border security. So I think she was trying to demonstrate that knowledge, and I think it fell flat because it was more of a policy wonkish response.
All right, well, so who won the debate? As we said, we've been keeping score with our focus group of voters. A lot of other numbers out there. Who started the night undecided? See which candidate earned their support and what issues made the greatest impact. That's next on this special edition of State of Texas. Welcome back. We're taking an in-depth look at the Texas gubernatorial debate and the response from voters. Our Sally Hernandez joins us live from our newsroom where we gathered a group of undecided voters. Sally, tell us a little bit about this group. How did they respond to the debate?
Responded very well to a few topics, Josh, but one of the most notable topics when I was in the room with the focus group this evening is they had a very strong reaction to the topic of marijuana.
I'm in favor of expanding medical marijuana. Alcohol has no medical benefits, yet it's taxed and fined. We know that medical marijuana has some health benefits. Why can't we tax and fine those also?
I have seen, however, in other states that authorize that, abuses take place that raise concerns. So I'm still not convinced yet. However, one thing I don't want to see is jails stockpiled with people who have possession of small amount of marijuana.
You know, Josh, that topic probably got the most response from our voters this evening. And also, Lupe Valdez got a favorable response from our voters when she said she wanted to leave it up to the voters when it comes to expanding marijuana beyond medical use. And Governor Abbott also got a favorable response from the voters when he said he would consider loosening the punishment for 2 ounces or less of marijuana. Wanted to get back to the numbers here because before they left, we got a chance to ask this focus group. Remember, they came into into the room as undecided voters, and I wanted to know if they were leaving with that same stance. So I had two questions for them that I wanted to share with you this evening. I said, in your opinion, who won the debate with the strongest performance? And 52% said Governor Greg Abbott did, 38% said Lupe Valdez, and 10% said neither. The other question, probably the most important for a lot of people, is after watching the debate, if the election were today, who would you vote for? 48% said Governor Greg Abbott, 43% said Lupe Valdez, and 10% were undecided. Josh?
Josh, I think the numbers or high numbers of undecided at the end of the debate represent a strategic victory for the governor. This was basically Lupe Valdez's only opportunity to make an impact across Texas. And he insisted on a forum that was very sterile. It was a forum that didn't include a live audience, although one was nearby. The energy was
specifically for that.
Yes, the energy was missing from the room, and the energy that was missing, I think, translated itself to a high number of undecideds at the end of this debate.
But interestingly, if the energy was missing from the crowd, I thought she brought it. She really, you know, while you said there was no knockout punch, she wasn't pulling them, and I thought that I saw a lot of her personality that I haven't seen before. And, you know, while there was still that 10%, amongst those people, there was still 48, 43. That's a pretty small margin. So while that, you know, isn't the electorate, it's not like that's what's reflected out there across the state. I thought that was interesting that she was able to almost break even.
And you know, Lauren, the interesting part was I think she was most effective when she interrupted the governor. It showed her passion.
I agree.
And that's when she really came across with regard to her personality.
I mean, one of her finest moments was when she was speaking about the rainy day fund.
Right, that was our favorite line.
Our favorite phrase.
Yeah.
We were talking about she needs a one-liner, a memorable one-liner, and she delivered. Governor, it rained.
All right, well, I'm going to interrupt us now. We'll have more analysis.
It is your finest moment.
We'll have more analysis right after the break. Welcome back to our special edition of State of Texas. Both candidates in tonight's debate did well with our group of voters when they talked about what made them proud to be a Texan.
There's no moment in Texas history that has made me more proud than to see the way our fellow Texans responded to Hurricane Harvey. That's what Texas is all about. These people on their own who got their own boats out to go rescue other people. It didn't matter who you were, what race you were. All that matters is you were a Texan, and a Texan was going to help you out.
Thank you, Governor.
I came from the poorest zip code in San Antonio and a migrant worker, from crop fields to classroom to candidate. From the poorest zip code in San Antonio to be able to be the candidate for governor and the governor of Texas.
Sure.
You have some final thoughts for us, Joy?
Well, the thing is, if you want to serve the state of Texas, you have to be proud of the state of Texas. And I believe politicians in the state are. I mean, if there's one thing that we are not lacking in the state is good self-esteem. And so it always makes us feel good to say Texas and that we're Texan and all this. So it was a beautiful note to end with. And I believe that they showed their humanity, even their vulnerabilities a little bit.
And the focus group liked it?
Yeah, I liked that they didn't attack each other. We saw that last week with the Beto Cruz. There was, Ted Cruz had a little dig for Beto O'Rourke at the end of that, you know, say something nice about the other candidate question. This one, they didn't try to make it about, you know, well, my opponent does this, I'm proud because of this. So I thought, you know, they both just said something that they felt proud of, and it was a good moment.
What did you think?
Ultimately, both of these candidates have very compelling personal stories, and that moment illustrated the compelling nature of their stories.
Was there any other moment from the debate that we haven't talked about tonight that really did stick out with you?
Oh, yes.
Well, she already said the governor, it rained. I felt like Lupe Valdez must have practiced saying that because you could just tell she really wanted to hit him over the head with it. You know, because I write about Confederate issues, I thought that the governor has evolved on the issue of this plaque that's in the Capitol. He said that he would be in favor of the legislature taking it down and would work with them to take it down. It claims that slavery did not cause a civil war. So that, to me, was the newsiest aspect of the night, but I'm a little biased because I cover that issue. So.
Interesting pivot that he took when he was asked about the bathroom bill.
Absolutely.
He didn't fully answer it the first time. They pressed him on it, and his answer was not as head-on as the governor usually is.
I would agree. Yeah.
So when we think about the people that were there in the audience, you know, backstage earlier we were talking about the audience was a lot of law enforcement personnel, but they were invited by Abbott's campaign. You know, just in the few seconds we have left, can you talk to me about what does that mean when a law enforcement community isn't backing Sheriff Valdez as much as maybe she would hope?
Well, she was very gracious in her answer about that. She said, you know, Governor, you hold the purse, right? And you hold it with vengeance, I think was her phrase, that the law enforcement community has to be respectful of the incumbent, and they normally are.
Would you agree?
I do, and you know, it all comes back to money, really. Who has the cash to put their face out there? And we saw it right when the debate ended. We saw that, you know, new Abbott ad with his mother-in-law, who is Hispanic, and you know, targeting that vote right there, and that's what it comes down to. He has $20+ million in the bank. It's going to behoove him.
All right. Well, thank you all for being with us. We normally bring our show, State of Texas, to you on Sunday mornings. We hope that you will join us each week for the latest in state politics in Austin. We're on KXAN right here before Meet the Press. Elsewhere in Texas, check your local listings.
For the first time in decades, a race for a U.S. Senate seat in Texas is close, just a month before Election Day. We're taking a closer look at where Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke stand on the issues and how they want to represent you. That's next on this special edition of State of Texas.
For many Texans, the race for Senate is the top contest on the ballot. Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz are in a close race that's drawing nationwide interest. Our Phil Prazen brings us an in-depth look at the candidates, their backstories, and where they stand on the issues.
For anything to change in this country, those ideas need to go through the United States Senate. And right now, that body is so close, one state election could decide who controls that body. And for the first time in decades, the Texas race is competitive. Texas. It's the second largest state both in size and population. It's one of the most diverse states in the country with more than 10 million Hispanics. More than 1 million people have a license to carry a gun. 4.5 million Texans don't have health insurance, and more than 1.7 million people came to this state illegally. America's issues are Texas issues. The two candidates are young and they represent two completely different worldviews. The incumbent Senator Ted Cruz came to the spotlight as the state's Solicitor General. That's the person who's arguing for the state of Texas in court, including 9 times at the Supreme Court. That's more than any other lawyer in the state at that time. In 2012, he won a place in the Senate by upsetting a powerful statewide elected official, mostly by tapping into an unmatched pool of volunteer grassroots workers.
Imagine millions of courageous conservatives all across America rising up together to say in unison, we demand our liberty.
He drove the Senate to the right in the age of Obama, and he made waves the day he showed up in the Senate. He was a partisan enemy of Democrats and a thorn in the side of Republican elders.
When the majority leader looks us in the eyes and makes an explicit commitment, he is willing to say things that he knows are false.
And then he ran for president.
I am announcing that I'm running for president of the United States.
He hired some of the best political operatives in the Republican Party. He won the Iowa caucuses, and then he tapped into Christian and working class voters who wanted a completely different direction after President Obama. And he would have won the nomination if it wasn't for Donald Trump.
He is choking like a dog because he's losing so badly.
Nothing seemed off limits.
That is his first and last resort, is to go to sleaze.
Bad blood between the two continued all the way to the Republican convention.
Vote your conscience.
But then he lost, and he ended up supporting Donald Trump in the general election.
What happened to vote your conscience?
And now Cruz is a major Trump ally in the Senate. For the past 6 years, he has dragged the Republican Party to the right. He wants to spend more tax dollars on border security. He's against citizenship status for people here illegally. He says the government should play hardly no role in health care, and he's against limiting people's access to guns. His opponent, Congressman Beto O'Rourke, comes from a much different place. His views are completely contrasting Senator Cruz's. He fell in love with punk rock at an early age. He was arrested for burglary after jumping a fence at UT El Paso and arrested again for driving drunk. He worked in the internet and software world before entering El Paso politics. And just like Cruz, he came to office by upsetting people in power. He was one of the youngest members ever on El Paso City Council, and he used that position to criticize American drug laws. He even co-wrote a book arguing that the war on drugs had failed. Then he went to Congress in a 2012 election versus a very powerful Democratic incumbent. He believes everybody buying a gun should go through a background check, and he wants to ban high-capacity magazines. He wants a faster path for people to become citizens, and he wants to legalize the people who are here illegally now. A public option for health care, and he wants to take corporations out of the way people get elected.
We're going to be the big answer to the small stuff going on in this country right now.
But to win, he's going to have to pull off one of the greatest political upsets in history. Texas hasn't elected a Democrat to the Senate in 30 years. That's my entire lifetime. Republicans control each branch of government, and there are 800,000 to 1 million more Republican voters in this state than there are Democrats. So why would this year be different? Well, there are two reasons. Senator Ted Cruz has built a reputation. Some love it, some hate it. And then there's the president. Moderates and suburban women are having a hard time putting an R next to their name because of the president's rhetoric, reputation, and all of these scandals coming from Washington. And we've seen Democrats upset Republicans across the country all year. And a lot of people are saying if it can happen in Alabama, why can't it happen in Texas? Remember that experienced professional textbook campaign staff that ran Senator Cruz's election for president? Well, they're here in Texas. And if Beto O'Rourke ran a race the way it's always been done, he's gonna lose. So he's not. Beto's campaign is decentralized, relying on these local Beto organizations to organize events in their neighborhoods. And then he's literally just driving around with 1 or 2 staffers in a car. He's spent more than a year going to all the 254 counties in the state.
By being in Brady, I have a better understanding of what's on the minds of those in Brady that I want to represent than by relying on a pollster in Washington, D.C. or some other part of the country.
The crowds are getting bigger and bigger. These black and white Beto signs seem to be everywhere, and he's raising money, a lot of money. Even with that $2,700 cap on individual donations, he's raising more money than Senator Cruz. But with all of that said, money doesn't vote and signs aren't people. And this all reinforces the myth of the undecided voter. I know very few people who are going to the polls and don't already know who they're going to vote for when they walk in the voting booth. There is a blue team and a red team, and whoever shows up more on Election Day wins. And Senator Ted Cruz excels in that partisan politic world. O'Rourke is trying to challenge that entire notion. Yes, earlier this year, Democrats showed up and nearly doubled their turnout in the primary election, but Republican voters still had 500,000 more people show up. This really is a story about the pinnacles of power in Texas now versus what it could be becoming. And we'll find out on Tuesday, November 6th.
Thanks, Phil. You'll get the chance to have your say in this race and all the others on the ballot in just a few weeks. Early voting starts on October 22nd, but remember, if you want to cast a ballot, you have to be registered to vote by Tuesday, October 9th. Thank you again for joining us for this special edition of State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. We'll be back on Sunday to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics.